Welcome to Partnering to Create Wealth. I'm David Marcus, Managing Director at New York Private Finance. We provide tailored credit facilities to individuals using illiquid assets as collateral, helping investors, entrepreneurs, and family offices unlock capital without selling assets or incurring dilution. On this podcast, I talk with trusted advisors and capital markets professionals about how they and their clients use debt as part of a smart, long-term wealth creation strategy. Thanks for listening. Today I'm joined by my colleague Brian Bristol, a managing director at New York Private Finance and one of its co-founders. Brian and I have known each other for over 20 years as we worked together in the early 2000s at the auction IPO-focused investment bank W.R. Hambrecht. Brian, it's great to have you here for the very first episode of Partnering to Create Wealth. I have a number of questions for you, but why don't you start by telling us about the genesis of New York Private Finance?
Sure, happy to, David. Maybe I'd just take a second and say that working with David at W.R. Hambrecht was what I was doing immediately prior to joining New York Private Finance. And when I left W.R. Hambrecht, I'd been an investment banker for 35 years, and I decided that the world didn't need Brian Bristol round three as an investment banker. But I sought to take advantage of what I saw as my primary skills, which were working with entrepreneurs involved in early stage companies. New York Private Finance gave me a great opportunity to do that because the business was started by two other gentlemen, myself, Lee Hoagland and Arthur Bingham. It was started basically to serve what we saw as an unmet need in the private lending marketplace. The genesis was, or the idea was created by Lee Hoagland when he was running the private banking business at Deutsche Bank. He recognized that as new banking regulations were coming into place, a lot of the major private banks were going to have trouble lending to people who wanted to use illiquid assets as collateral for personal loans. Now, that's a lot to throw out in one sentence. So what do I mean by illiquid assets? Such things as equity in private companies, limited partnership interests, LLC interests, et cetera. The kinds of things that the major private banks would be willing to take as collateral prior to the financial crisis in 2008, 9, 10. But post 2008, 9, 10, they were no longer willing to take as collateral for a personal loan. So we saw an opportunity developing in the private banking marketplace to make loans using illiquid assets as collateral. This was Lee's idea, which he developed, as I said, at Deutsche Bank. And it became the genesis for our business plan, which we marketed to a number of potential investors and ultimately found the ideal partner in Howard Milstein at Emigrant Bank, who recognized the opportunity that we saw as one which was very well suited to a bank that specialized in meeting the needs of entrepreneurs and their families. And because Emigrant was a mid-sized, privately owned bank, it had certain degrees of flexibility that enabled it to work with us and facilitate our business, but without compromising its relationship with the regulators.
You mentioned that prior to the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, banks were lending to wealthy individuals and family offices using illiquid assets as collateral. How big of a business was that type of lending at the time?
I think it was more of a niche market for the major private banks. What they typically preferred to do was to do jumbo mortgages. Those are easy products for them to sell and one which their wealthy private clients needed. And ultimately, the goal of most of the major private banks was to get control of assets which they could manage for those wealthy individuals and families. In order to develop those relationships, though, they would, where the opportunity presented itself, provide personal loans to the individuals, because there's no better way to develop a relationship with someone than to lend him or her money. I wouldn't say that it was a significant part of their business. Lee would know better. I'll let him correct me in a future podcast, but I'd say maybe 10, 20% of their business. Meaningful, extremely profitable, but not the driving force of the business.
Interesting. So even before the 2008 financial crisis and the advent of the Basel III Accords, lending to individuals against illiquid assets was a relatively small business for the large banks. So tell me, what is unique and valuable about our product, particularly among regulated banks?
First, why do I think it's unique? We've been in business for 12 years, and during those 12 years, I have found no other regulated bank that has a dedicated effort doing what we do. We find ourselves competing with other solutions to entrepreneurs' problems, but we don't know of anyone else that does precisely what we do, and certainly no entity which is part of a regulated private bank. Question number 2, why do I think it's valuable? The flip answer to that is that the market tells me so. We have had a lot of conversations, literally hundreds upon hundreds, with people over the past decade or so who are interested in the product. Now, we haven't done hundreds upon hundreds of loans because we're very careful to ensure that we're not putting the bank's capital at risk. But probably even more important than that is we want to make sure that we make loans that are going to help people build their wealth and not put them in a position where they could potentially be putting their well-being at risk. We do not want to make the kind of loans that are sometimes called loan to own, where a lender lends the individual more money than is appropriate to the circumstances as a way to get control of the collateral. We don't do that. Our goal is to enable entrepreneurs to build their wealth.
What types of people do you think should be reaching out to us for our expertise?
I'd say there are probably 2 broad categories. The first is obviously people who have substantial ownership of illiquid assets. Generally, that means equity in private companies, middle market private companies, not exclusively, as I said before, but that's what most of the ownership is, and who are looking to borrow personally in order to make additional investments. We can talk later about what those investments are. So the first people who should be talking to us are people who think they want to borrow personally. The second group is advisors to those individuals, and those advisors can be wealth managers. They can be mid-market investment bankers and deal shops who tend to focus on M&A for middle market companies, can be lawyers who work with wealthy families and entrepreneurs, typically in, I would say, mid-sized cities away from the major urban areas in the United States, can also be accountants. There are other kinds of advisors who serve as intermediaries between wealthy entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their wealth and sources of capital. Any of those intermediaries should find what we're doing at least worthy a conversation with their clients as to whether or not we make sense for them and their clients. That's got to be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Obviously, the private credit world is a really busy space, and I shouldn't just limit that to private credit because banks still do play in the space. But in terms of what we do, there are many lenders out there that lend to the same folks we lend to. The difference, though, is in the process and what we do and how we do it. And ultimately, I think, as you've said earlier, I have yet to find someone, an entity, that lends to individual borrowers against illiquid assets in the size and tenor that we do. Yeah, I'm sure there are some out there, but it's truly a unique corner of the credit world, and hope that anyone out there for whom this could be interesting will give us a call. We look forward to talking to you. Brian, I know we will speak many more times, but for now, this has been great. Thanks again for joining us on the first of this series, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Look forward to our next conversation. Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to Partnering to Create Wealth. If you found today's conversation useful, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast. To learn more about how we help clients unlock capital using illiquid assets, visit the New York Private Finance LinkedIn page or visit our website, nyprivatefinance.com. I'm David Marcus. See you next time.